"Listen up, my friends," he addressed them. "It's time you rested your weary heads on your pillows. We cannot work well if we haven't slept well. Tomorrow we have a hard day ahead of us, taking ownership of our new dwelling and making it our own. We have come far, by God's grace. We have already made a splendid start in Vinland. May it be a glimpse of a satisfying conclusion. So off you go to your bedrolls before it gets too late, and slumber soundly. I will oversee the camp's security and make certain the sentries are alert." The men readily heeded his brief speech and promptly followed the instruction. Crumar noticed that he complied with the norm simply out of reverence for his comrades' opinions. Having resided in Ireland, where the lads worked or fought all day, danced all night, and went home with the girls in the morning, Crumar had learned how to go without sleeping. Each Viking then looked for a suitable grassy knoll, used his arm or a hillock or rock as a pillow, or anything that lay around, and with a sword or an axe propped up beside him, and a shield laid above him as a blanket, drifted off to slumber. The beaming stars glittered, lulling them to sleep, with the softly lapping water nearby crooning them a lullaby. Chapter 10. Taking possession of the new home, an event which is celebrated by an explosion and a reconciliation. It is said that early to bed and early to rise leads to health, wealth, and wisdom. Even the Norsemen of old seemed to understand and practice this wisdom. Kjartan and his men were no exception, retiring early at night and getting up at daybreak the next morning. After making sure all was secure and properly stored on their vessel, the Snake, they set off to row upriver to find a place to call home. A group of men remained behind to cut up and dry the whale that they had caught. Kjartan instructed Swend, the leader of the whaling party, to do an excellent job and ensure there was no sand in the meat, coupled with the importance of collecting the whalebone. He also warned them of lurking enemies in the woods and reminded them to remain vigilant at all times. As Kjartan and his crew rowed up Little River, the current became swifter. They were not deterred by this. Instead, they sent a large group of men, armed with oars and tracking ropes, to further assist them. Eventually, they overcame all obstacles and reached their destination, a beautiful sheet of water that the Scotsman had raved about. At this point, Kjartan exclaimed, "Here, then, we have got home at last!" Gunhilda voiced her agreement with the beauty of the land, but found it difficult to call it home, while Frigga attempted to persuade her sister that this new land was far superior to their previous abode. During the discussion, Bergunnar agreed that the land was fantastic, albeit strange. Finally, Frigga scolded Bergunnar for always agreeing with Kjartan. As we conclude this chapter of their story, it seems that Kjartan and his men have found a new home, full of challenges and uncertainties, but with a beauty unlike anything they had seen before. Bergunnar beamed as she spoke. "I only wept on leaving my father, but I'm sure you've not seen me shed a tear since then. Besides, I do agree with you in this case, for I think Vinland will be a pleasant home. Don't you too?" she asked Thorgunnar, who had been by her side a moment ago. But Thorgunnar had disappeared, and in her place stood Hafgrimur, the Scot. When their eyes met, Bergunnar blushed. Her blush deepened when Hafgrimur, in a quiet tone, said that Vinland could not but be a pleasant home to him. He even added that whether it was Greenland or Iceland or Norway, anywhere would be equally pleasant, if only she were there. The cool and sudden boldness of his response took Bergunnar by surprise. She looked around in alarm to make sure nobody overheard, but Hafgrimur had intentionally whispered it to her ear. Fortunately, at that moment, everyone's attention was drawn to the sound of the ship's keel grinding onto the pebbled shore. "Now then, jump ashore, lads," cried Bolverk, "and get out the gangway. Make it broad, for our cattle must not be allowed to risk their limbs by tumbling off." Bolverk supervised the gangway, while Thorkel prepared the livestock for their new home. Kjartan examined the huts they would be staying in. They were in excellent condition, having been well built originally, with their doors and windows secured against the weather. "No natives could have been here," said Kjartan to his companions, "because every fastening is secured as it was left. Nevertheless, Sigrid and I have seen footprints in the sand." Gunhild pointed out. "There they are," she added, pointing towards a sandy spot. "And he who made them must have been a giant. They are so large." "Truly a dangerous giant to meet with," Kjartan laughed. "These are none other than the footprints of the bear that the two Scots sent away with the toothache. But come, we will open these huts and have them put in order and made comfortable before supper time. So get to work, all of you, and see how active you can be." While some of the party swept out and arranged the huts, others went into the woods to cut down dead trees for firewood. When the gangway between ship and shore was completed, the livestock was driven onto land. The sight was impressive as the creatures solemnly made their way to their new home, giving the landing the air of a procession. It was almost like witnessing the beasts from Noah's Ark disembarking from the top of Ararat. The first creature to disembark was a lordly black bull. Little Olaf, who had grown fond of the bull during the voyage, was permitted to oversee its landing. By feeding it, petting it, and talking to it, Olaf had won the bull's affection. "Get on, Blackie!" Olaf cried out as he urged the bull forward with a push to its flank. The beast stood tall and proud on the gangway, nostrils flaring and eyes flashing as it surveyed its new surroundings. Ogmundr encouraged Blackie to move, but the bull ignored him and instead rumbled deeply in its chest. Bolverk, laughing, compared the sound to Mount Hekla about to erupt. "Come back, boy, he'll hurt you," Gunhildr warned with concern. Olaf's pet was being disobedient. Kjartan suggested Olaf speak louder to the bull, but Ogmundr had a better idea. He quietly grabbed the beast's tail and twisted it. The effect was immediate and remarkable. Blackie charged forward along the gangway, kicking up pebbles as he went, and barreled into the forest with wild delight, bellowing and thrashing his tail. The cows, on the other hand, made their way calmly and contentedly down the gangway, their patient faces expressing their satisfaction, much to the annoyance of Frigga. She wished they were all bulls. However, one heifer stood out from the others with her savage glare and refusal to leave the ship. She created chaos and barely made it onto the shore, proving to be quite an impressive sight in Frigga's eyes. The sheep looked rather sheepish, walking with solemnity as if in mourning, while the Icelandic ponies seemed a bit gloomy after the long journey at sea. One pony attempted to neigh, and another let out a sound that sounded like a horse laugh. The fowl made their way off the ship in different ways, some walking, others flying or fluttering. The senior cock capped off their spectacle by crowing loudly from atop one of the huts, claiming the land as his own. Lastly, the ducks waddled out, some looking surprised, others quacking curiously, while a few tried to nibble on anything they found edible. All the animals were safely landed and taken to the woods, guarded by several dogs who were too close to their human companions to be considered part of the procession. There was no fear of them getting lost, as they were under the watchful eye of their new caretakers. Hafgrimur approached Kjartan, who was busy organizing the primary hut while their companions brought their belongings ashore. "Shall we set the nets?" he asked. "We spotted a salmon leap from a pool on Little River. I'm sure there are more in the lake." "By all means, Hafgrimur," Kjartan replied. "Grab your brother and set the nets where you see fit. Fresh salmon would be a rare delight tonight. Are you sure it was a salmon and not a hefty trout?" Hafgrimur chuckled and replied, "As sure as a horse is not a cow." The two swiftly set the nets in the bay, near the point of the Ness where their huts awaited them, close to a small mountain stream that flowed into the lake. Suddenly, an angry voice erupted from a hut near the lake. Frigga was furiously berating poor Bergunr, while Thorkel grumbled in the background. "Poor Bergunr," Kjartan remarked to his friend Bolverk. "She has a tough mistress." "Poor Thorkel," Bolverk replied. "He's stuck with a fiery wife." Kjartan laughed. "Either he'll fix her or she'll be the end of him. He's lenient with women, but he's not a pushover." Bolverk shook his head, doubtful about Thorkel's control over Frigga's emotions. "It would have been a better match," he declared, "if Thorkel had wedded Bergunr instead. She's a sweet little lass with fair hair and blue eyes." Kjartan raised his eyebrow in surprise. "You seem quite taken with the idea, my friend." Bolverk smiled and shook his head. "Alas, my heart lies buried in Iceland. I'm destined to be a bachelor." They both paused to listen as the domestic squabble inside the small hut turned fierce. Though Thorkel was hardly audible, his voice was stern and resolute. In contrast, Frigga's could be heard loud and clear. "It's dead, Bergunr," she bellowed, her tone enraged. "You killed it with your carelessness. If only you had fed it properly like the others. Don't you dare say you did your best. You're a sly-faced fox. Don't you dare speak back to me. I said, keep your mouth shut. Your neglect killed that kitten." "If you don't keep quiet, my dear wife," Thorkel sternly warned, "I'll kill that cat too." There was a moment of silence, as if Frigga was caught off guard by the threat. "That was the little kitten," Kjartan whispered to Bolverk, "the one that the dogs had almost devoured. Bergunr had nothing to do with its passing. I'm surprised it survived so long." "Kill the cat!" Frigga screeched, stamping her feet. A deafening screech ripped through the air, followed by a shadowy figure flying out of the hut like a bat out of hell. It soared up high, tracing a grand arc, before plummeting into the depths of the nearby lake, creating a deafening splash that echoed across the surrounding forest. Frigga, just emerging from the hut, stood frozen, her hands clasped in terror. Thorkel strolled out shortly after, his face twisted into a dark scowl. Without uttering a word, he trudged off into the woods, leaving his wife behind. For what felt like an eternity, Frigga remained motionless, gazing out at the motionless body floating on the lake's surface. When she noticed that the object was a cat, the colour drained from her face, and she staggered back into the hut, aghast and petrified. "It's cruel," Kjartan mourned while observing the scene. "But perhaps it was fitting," Bolverk mused. "Perhaps so," Kjartan retorted, "but one right outcome does not justify a sinful act. Oh, look, here comes Gunnhildr." As Gunnhildr appeared, unaware of the recent events, she sought Kjartan's help to tidy up some of the fixtures in their new home. Kjartan, trying to cheer her up, told Gunnhildr how she was the most valuable fixture in their house. The two left to work on the house, and Bolverk departed for the ship. Thorkel eventually made his way back to the hut, finding Frigga beside herself, sitting on a crate, sobbing loudly. He sat down beside her solemnly, regret etched on his face. "Frigga," Thorkel said gently, "I'm sorry for what I did. It was cruel and unfair. It's done now, and I can't undo it. I'm asking for your mercy and forgiveness." Frigga's head rose suddenly, her face reddening with fury. "Thorkel," she said firmly, "I would hate you to the depths of my soul if you came at me with anything other than a sincere apology." Thorkel chuckled. "I know the power of your hate. But now, Frigga—" He kissed her deeply, their embrace filled with heartfelt passion. Thorkel stood and looked down at her, smiling softly. "Thank you, my dear," he said fondly. "I am glad we made amends. As for the cat, well, I shall find the finest cat in all of Iceland or Greenland, even if I have to sail there myself." And with that promise, Thorkel and Frigga's first days in Vinland concluded, their quarrel put to rest by the innocent cadaver of an unfortunate feline. The next day, Kjartan spoke to Thorkel about the importance of avoiding quarrels and violence, emphasizing that they never bring anything good, but instead create more harm. Kjartan also warned Thorkel that while Frigga deserved a reprimand, the cat did not deserve a violent end. Thorkel shook his head with amusement, knowing Kjartan always had a knack for giving good advice. "If only I could say that you were equally wise in taking what you need. Alas, I have hope for you yet, Thorkel, my friend. Come, let's go and see the fruits that the nets have brought us. Look, Hafgrimr and Hervor are rowing back to the land." Upon examination of the fisherman's haul, it was discovered that their boat was loaded with magnificent trout of all sizes, some of them even weighing in at over 5 or 6 pounds. They had caught a sizable amount of other fine fish, although not a single salmon was among them. Despite this, the fishermen had every reason to be pleased with their success. The bounty of fish would be more than enough to provide a hearty supper for the entire party, ensuring that their first night in their new home, just like their first night, would be a jovial one. Chapter 11. Settling down Hafgrimr proves that his arms, as well as his legs, are good a wonderful fishing incident, which ends in a scene between Frigga and Krumr. The village by Vinland Lake, once desolate and silent, now bustled with the energy of hard-working Norsemen. They had much to do to make their new home comfortable. The forest and undergrowth surrounding the village needed clearing. The 6 existing huts needed to be repaired and fitted with new parchment in the windows. New huts for the people, pens for the sheep, and stabling for the cattle had to be built, all requiring timber to be felled and squared. In addition to building and repairing, the people stayed occupied with making smaller household furniture and fittings. A hunting party was assigned to provide food for the community, while another group tended to the nets in the lake. Kjartan led a third group out into the woods to forage for food and investigate the resources of the new land. The settlers had much to be satisfied with regarding their new land. The land extended as far as the eye could see, with diverse terrain, teeming waters with fish, verdant lands, and forests abundant with game of all sizes. On one of their expeditions, Kjartan, Bolverk, Hafgrimr, and several men went to explore the small river branching from the main river mentioned earlier. Some of the men brought bows and arrows, others carried spears and shields. Kjartan and Bolverk held short spears or javelins and wore swords and iron headpieces. They never left the settlement without full armor, as no native people had been spotted, and an attack could be sudden and unexpected. As they progressed through the forest, they saw a rustle of leaves atop a knoll. Suddenly, a large deer ran across their path. Kjartan immediately hurled his spear but only grazed its back. Bolverk missed with his weapon, but Hafgrimr fired his bow with accuracy and force. The animal fell dead on the ground, with the arrow piercing through his heart and the blood-stained bow tree. Kjartan turned to Hafgrimr with admiration. He complimented him on his accurate shot, and asked whether it was chance or if Hafgrimr's hand was always quick and his eye accurate. Hafgrimr replied that he never missed his mark. Kjartan raised an eyebrow, surprised by Hafgrimr's confidence. Hafgrimr clarified that he didn't boast and his words were truthful and modest. "Is that so?" exclaimed Kjartan, intrigued, as he scanned the trees around him. "Prove it, then. Do you see that tiny bird sitting on the top branch of the birch tree by the stream? It stands out against the sky, a clear target. Shoot it if you can." Hafgrimr remained motionless. "That bird is not my mark," he said. "I do not aim at the moon or objects out of the range of my arrows." Laughing, Kjartan challenged him again. "What about the small knot on the pine tree, barely visible but not half a bowshot away? Will that suffice?" Before anyone could react, Hafgrimr's first arrow hit the knot with a thud. Kjartan was stunned, but Hafgrimr was not done yet. A second arrow joined the first. "Try once more," Krumr encouraged Hafgrimr. "Odd numbers bring good fortune." Hafgrimr did not hesitate. The third arrow landed, completing a perfect set. Kjartan was impressed. "Well done, Hafgrimr. Your skill with the bow is an asset to Leif Erikson, who has the King of Norway to thank for the gift of such a valuable thrall. Two of you, take that deer and deliver it to Gunhildr. Tell her your story and what you have witnessed." He added with a smile, "Leave out the details before the successful shot. A good story is brief, pithy, and devoid of extraneous details. The wisest tongue knows when to speak and when to be silent. Come, Bolverk, let's continue our exploration of the stream." As they walked along the banks of Little River, they arrived at the very spot where Hafgrimr and his brother witnessed the salmon leap. "Is this where you saw the salmon jump on your first visit?" inquired Bolverk. "It is," replied Hafgrimr. "Where exactly?" asked Bolverk. "Right below the tail of the island, where the water deepens with oily ripples," answered Hafgrimr. "A likely spot," commented Kjartan. Just then, a salmon leapt out of the water to confirm Hafgrimr's statement, and another fish followed, tail fan waving to make it all too obvious. They spent some time examining the part of the river that was divided by a long island into two streams, which eventually united after spreading out into a broad, rippling, shallow section. Bolverk was meticulously inspecting the riverbed, particularly at the top and lower end of the island, whilst Kjartan watched on. "You seem to be thinking of something, Bolverk," said Kjartan. "What's on your mind?" "Well, a plan is forming in my head. It's pretty straightforward, but the details require attention." "All right, let's head back home and discuss it on the way. You know about the custom in Iceland," Bolverk said as they started walking back, "regarding a river that's similar to this, with two channels. They shut off the water from one channel and catch the fish when the bed is dry." "I know about it, my friend. How did I not think of this sooner? Let's try it, without any delay. What's worth doing is worth doing now, unless there's a clear advantage to delay. Since that's not the case, we'll start tomorrow." So the next day, Kjartan and his men went down to the island on Little River, with Bolverk supervising the engineering operations and Thorkel managing the mechanical details. First, Bolverk selected the spot at the top of the island where a dam needed to be built across the right branch of the stream which was going to be dried up. He then planned the direction the dam would take and its shape. Strong stakes were driven into the riverbed all across the head of the branch, being blocked off. As this was happening, Thorkel marked some straight, tall trees in the forest and set men to cut them down. Meanwhile, Kjartan directed a team assigned to collect huge piles of earth, sand, stones, mud, and branches on the river's bank. Though the workers were many and hard-working, the job was quite an extensive one, and the day had turned to dusk before they managed to drive all the stakes and lay the first heavy logs down in the dry river channel. The rest of the collected materials were piled up in preparation on the banks, and so, having completed these preparations, they returned to the huts and planned for an all-out push on the following day. Early the next morning, almost the entire village went to Little River, leaving the settlement under the care of 1 or 2 men who were ill at the time. Ogmundur was among them, carrying a massive iron hook attached to the end of a strong pole. Even the women came, as keen as the men to observe the spectacle. Kjartan and his party arrived at the island, dividing themselves into 2 groups. The smaller group, armed with long poles, waded into the water at the lower end of the channel. They spaced themselves out evenly, extending from the tail of the island to the right bank of the stream. Their task was to prevent any fish from rushing down the river towards them. The rest of the group headed towards the dam, waiting for instructions. Kjartan addressed the group. "If we all work together, we will succeed. Here is the plan. Once Bolverk gives the signal, we will work to complete the dam, blocking the water from flowing right across from this bank to the head of the island. The center gap will be the toughest part, where the water will rush the strongest. You must do it quickly, using logs, stones, branches, and turf to secure the dam. Do not forget the sense of urgency, as if your very lives depended on it. A group of you shall widen the other branch of the stream. Take this time to prepare your fishing equipment. You can figure the rest out for yourselves. Bolverk, assign the men and get to work." Little Ogmundur Eriksson's eyes displayed great excitement at the prospect of this new experience. He had seen fishermen haul in nets and catch fish, but the idea of drying up a riverbed was entirely new to him. His mind raced as he tried to imagine this new adventure. His excitement increased tenfold when he observed the men throwing off their shirts and digging into the task with fierce enthusiasm. In his diminutive way, he helped by carrying logs, branches, mud, and stones, until his clothes were as dirty as those of his adult companions. Even when his aunt Gunnhildr looked disapprovingly at him and stated that he would be impossible to clean, he laughed so hard that he lost his balance, fell into the river, and emerged half-washed and drenched. "Look at me! I am perfectly clean now!" he exclaimed, catching his breath. "Olaf, are you trying to catch a salmon?" Svend asked as he passed by with a massive log on his shoulder. Olaf responded, "No, Svend, I am trying to catch a whale." "You don't say so, boy," Krummer uttered admiringly. "Was it a big one?" "Oh, how frightful! He was so big that I couldn't see him at all," exclaimed Olaf. "If you couldn't see him at all, then he must have been a big one for sure. The things we can't see are always the most wonderful," replied Gunnhildr. "Foolish boy," scolded Gunnhildr. "Come here and let me wring the water out of your clothes." "It's hardly worth it, Auntie," protested Olaf, who knew he will be wet again in a few minutes. Despite Olaf's protests, Gunnhildr carefully wrung out as much water out of his clothes as she could. By this time the dam was completed, and the men wiped off and wrung out excess mud and water from their clothes, while preparing their hooks, nets, and staves. Some nets were several yards long, while others were small bags attached to wooden rings at the end of long poles. Suddenly a shout was heard from the men at the lower end of the pool, and they used their staves to push some startled fish downriver. Soon the ground on which the men stood became a shallow, rippling stream, joining the island with the shore's lower end. The fish below were now trapped in a pool, with no retreat above or below, while the whole river flowed into the left branch's bed. As the water in the pool lowered, a swarm of salmon came into view, darting hither and thither in shoals, jostling each other under stones and making for deeper parts of the pool. Gradually little islets appeared as the water continued to sink, and the fish, seized with panic, shot out from bank to bank, resembling a fishy country dance. They leaped, slid, twirled, and bounded frantically on the pebbly islets in what looked like a piscatorial reel. The islets enlarged, joined here and there, and ultimately the stream's bed turned into little ponds boiling with fish. The Norsemen were half mad with excitement. The women clapped their hands and shouted with delight, while Frigga couldn't contain herself, casting appearances to the dogs and joining in the fray. "The big pool first! This way, lads!" Kjartan shouted as he grabbed the end of a long net and dragged it towards the pool in question. 20 eager hands assisted in the great fishing endeavour. The net was cast and quickly closed in around the pool, men with poles forcing one side down to the bottom while the other two ends were hauled upon with all their might. At the same time, other men approached smaller pools with hand nets, scooping up the fish and sending them wriggling and struggling through the air towards the bank. Gunnhildr, Thorgunnar, Astrid, Gunnhild, Sigrid, and even timid Bergunnar tried in vain to restrain their struggles and prevent them from flopping back into the almost dry bed of the stream. "Haul away with heart, men!" shouted Bolverk, stationed at one end of the large net. Already the stout ropes were strained to their utmost limit, until at last the net burst forth with an abundance of salmon within. More hands were called upon, and the net was pulled over the pebbles, up the bank, and onwards to a flat, open spot. With a holler, the net was emptied on to the greensward. Talk of silver bars, the simile is futile. No comparison could do justice here, for salmon shone with a sparkle that could never be replicated by silver bars. They wriggled and sprang and tumbled, exhibiting a delicious pink colour and vigorous life that suggested firm flakes and glorious meals for many days to come. Even their value was secondary, as all the silver bars in the universe could never buy the hunger and excitement of these Norsemen. They danced around the fish, caught up in triumphant glee. "Come, come," shouted Kjartan. "To work, to work! You may dance later. Sweep this pool also." With a cheer the men ran down the bank, and little Ogmundur followed, having already pulled 6 large fish out of various holes and adding them to the pile. Tricker fell on a salmon, crushing it with his weight, but he rose with a growl and grin, running on to rejoin his comrades. As the second pool was netted, Ogmundur noticed that several fish had escaped. Striking in his hook at random, he pulled fiercely as the sturdy handle jerked violently, nearly causing him to fall. Thorkel ran to his aid, carefully untangling the hook to reveal an eel. The scene was set at Little River in Vinland, and the fishermen were in high spirits as they reeled in their catch. Olaf had just hooked a massive eel, which was wriggling and twisting in his grip. The other fishermen were cheering him on, encouraging him to reel it in. But just as Olaf was about to secure his prize, the eel slipped from his grasp and darted away. Ogmund and Thorkel tried to catch the slippery creature, but it was too quick. It wound itself around his legs in a frenzy, then darted off into the river and disappeared from view. Thorkel laughed it off, urging Olaf to try again. But the laughter was short-lived when the women on the bank started shrieking. Gunhild pointed to the riverbed, where Frigga had somehow ended up waist-deep in mud and salmon. No one knew how she got there, but she was struggling to get out. The fishermen rushed over to help, but they couldn't resist a bit of teasing at Frigga's expense. She was covered in mud and looked like a sculptor's clay model, they joked. Krummer offered Frigga his hand, but she wasn't interested in help. Instead, she pulled him down into the mud with her, then stepped on his back to climb out. The other fishermen roared with laughter, and Krummer became the butt of their jokes for years to come. It was just another day on the river for these Norsemen, full of laughter, teasing, and adventure. And for Frigga and Krummer, it was a moment they would never forget. Chapter 12. Sage converse between Halfgrimr and Bergunnar Bolverk is outwitted, a monster is slain, and savages appear on the scene. In the early days of the new settlement, an event ignited great excitement, the appearance of natives in the woods. This event took place under peculiar circumstances. Kjartan, the leader, had established a plan to split his men into 2 groups. One group would stay behind to work while the other searched the land. They were always cautious to stay close enough so they could return home at night and never strayed too far away from each other. One day, Kjartan ordered an exploration party to be ready immediately. Bolverk was in control of the group. Sometimes Kjartan would join them, and other times he would stay at home. Halfgrimr, a member of the group, spotted a female disappearing into the woods near the lake. Halfgrimr asked Bolverk if he could go to the lake's edge, promising to meet up with the exploration party at Willow Glen. Bolverk agreed, specifying that Halfgrimr needed to rejoin the team before noon, since they would take an entirely new path that day. Halfgrimr caught up with the female and discovered that it was Bergunnar. He respectfully greeted her. Despite his bondage, he had not lost his manners. Bergunnar, who has a habit of blushing, stated that she liked wandering in the woods. Halfgrimr warned that it could be hazardous to wander far from home, since natives could find them at any moment, such that they would take Bergunnar away, and nobody would know she was gone until it was too late to track her. Bergunnar was troubled by the thought and promised to be more cautious. Then Halfgrimr revealed that he found something good, beautiful, and useful. Bergunnar, being unable to solve riddles, did not know the answer. Halfgrimr didn't say anything, but his eyes spoke volumes. Bergunnar changed the subject and asked Halfgrimr if he was part of the exploration party, and Halfgrimr revealed that he had permission to go by the lake's edge. "If you delay our conversation now, you'll struggle to catch up to them later," the youth replied curtly. Upon noticing Bergunnar's unease with the topic, he smoothly transitioned to expressing his affinity for walking by the lake as it reminded him of Scotland. "You claim to love Scotland," teased Bergunnar, "yet your brother seems to love it more than you." "With good reason," responded Halfgrimr. "Scotland granted him a bride, but it did not afford me that luxury." "Who is his bride?" inquired the maiden with great interest. "Emma. Poor Emma," sighed Bergunnar sympathetically. "But perhaps one day when Hervor is freed and returns to his homeland, he will wed Emma. Then perhaps Scotland will smile upon you and give you a reason to love it more." "I already love it deeply," declared Halfgrimr enthusiastically, "but I am content to remain here. For shame, Halfgrimr! If you truly mean what you say, you don't deserve to be a Scot. I mean what I say, yet I still deserve to be a Scot, rebutted Halfgrimr confidently. Then tell me, what is Scotland like? Do you find it more beautiful than Iceland? It is not more wonderful than Iceland, but it is breathtakingly beautiful. It is a land of mountains and rivers, of lush hills and pastures. Its peak stretches high into the sky, where eagles soar. Its streams tumble over rocks in their infancy, but mature into calm waters that flow through hazel dells where birds sing. Its reedy lochs are home to wildfowl, and its hills to moorfowl. The water is teeming with trout and salmon. The air is temperate, and the land is filled with the beauty of form and colour. Its sons are devoted to their homeland, and its daughters are stunningly beautiful. And yet it appears that not one of them is beautiful enough for you, observed Bergunnar. That's hardly fair, Bergunnar. The heart cannot always control its affections, but I don't regret it. And where does Emma reside? Queried Bergunnar. Near my father, by the shores of Forth, close to a famous town and castle on a rocky ridge. It is named after Edwin, a Northumbrian king. It's a lovely romantic spot, my dear hometown. Near it is a mountain that visitors say resembles a crouching lion, though I have never seen one and cannot vouch for its truth. You make me almost want to see this Scotland, sighed Bergunnar. I wish you could see it and that I could show it to you, said Halfgrimr wistfully. That's unlikely, laughed Bergunnar a little. You'll never know what might happen, replied Halfgrimr with a smile. The most unlikely things occur, and the most probable things often do not. Look at Kjartan. Who would have thought he'd forsake the religion of his forefathers and become a Christian? Bergunnar asks Halfgrimr about the new religion that has affected many people. Halfgrimr confesses to not knowing much about it, but he knows that its foundation is God and man united in Jesus Christ, and that the guiding principle is love. Bergunnar argues that the religion is not faulty, but rather some of its followers are not true to its teachings. Halfgrimr agrees, but wonders what happens if the people who profess the religion do not change. Bergunnar tells Halfgrimr to ask Kjartan for more information and leaves. Halfgrimr meets Bolverk, who announces they would explore some unknown lands towards the west. Halfgrimr tells Bolverk that a spirited chief would explore more than a day's march from home. Bolverk retorts that it's best to put one's homestead in order before pursuing explorations. They encounter a brown bear, and Halfgrimr is ready to attack it when Bolverk suggests they observe how the natives of Greenland treat white bears. I like the sound of it, Halfgrimr said in awe. Very well, said the experienced hunter. But first, let me explain the process. When two native hunters encounter a bear, they approach the animal with spears and separate. One of them plans to kill the bear by thrusting the spear into its heart, while the other distracts the animal. Then the one who plans to kill approaches the bear from the heart side, while the other pricks the bear on the opposite side. This causes the bear to turn towards the one who pricked him and exposes its heart side, allowing the hunter to kill it with a single thrust. Do you understand the strategy? Absolutely, replied Halfgrimr. Perhaps you would like to try it with me on our next hunting adventure, although there is some danger, suggested Bolverk, eager to give Halfgrimr a good scare in retaliation for his previous advice. A grim smile spread across Halfgrimr's face as he took a short spear from one of his comrades and pointed at the bear. Let's go, he said. Together they approached the massive bear, each carrying a spear while their fellow hunters watched from a nearby ridge with great interest. As the bear rose on its hind legs, growling menacingly, Bolverk asked Halfgrimr if he was sure of his abilities and not afraid. Instead of answering, Halfgrimr simply laughed lightly and followed the plan. We must approach and act together, he reminded Bolverk, warning him not to get flustered. He seems inclined to meet us halfway, and must not be trifled with, and prick him well, for his hide will likely prove tough. As they separated and ran towards the bear, it stopped in bewilderment, unsure of which hunter to attack. Seizing the opportunity, they both charged at the animal. Halfgrimr plunged his spear with such force that it penetrated the bear's heart and came out the other side, causing the animal to roar in agony and collapse on the ground. The hunters on the ridge erupted in cheers. "Why did you do that?" Bolverk demanded angrily, stepping towards Halfgrimr as if he intended to hit him. "Wasn't it agreed that I would kill the bear?" "The fates had other plans," replied Halfgrimr calmly. "I feared that my own apprehension might weaken my arm. To ensure success, I gave it a good thrust. Besides, didn't you warn me that his hide was tough and advise me to prick him well?" Halfgrimr's gentle tone and innocent expression made Bolverk chuckle despite himself. "You certainly got him good," remarked Bolverk. "I don't resent you taking the credit, and it was well done." Two of the men were instructed to stay behind and skin the bear while they continued onward. "Might as well cut off the best parts for food. This kind of bear might be suitable for that," he added. As they proceeded, one of the party suddenly exclaimed and pointed to footprints on a soft part of the ground. "Could be the bears," suggested one man. "Too small and narrow," retorted another. "Let's follow them until we reach softer ground and be sure," said Bolverk. After walking some distance, they reached a sandy area where the footprints were clearly that of a man. They were certain as no one in their party had the same shoe-sole shape as indicated by the prints. "We need to prepare ourselves for potential foes," warned Bolverk. "Halfgrimr, we may need to hurry, so go back and advise Kjartan of what we found. We'll follow with your bear as fast as we can." Without hesitation, Halfgrimr ran back to the hamlet, only to find it in a state of panic and confusion. "What's happening?" asked Kjartan. "Strange footprints have been found and—" Halfgrimr said out of breath. "Strange footprints," interrupted Kjartan. "We've seen strange men ourselves, so I have even stranger news. Bolverk is returning, right?" "Yes, with all the men, as fast as they can." "Good. Get your weapons ready and help the others prepare for the visitors. I'll go sort out our ship," Kjartan replied. Halfgrimr soon learned that a man from their wood-cutting party had seen a native crouching behind a rock, peering at them while stringing an arrow to his short bow. The native didn't notice the Norseman at first, but immediately sprang up and shot an arrow, which missed. The Norseman attacked the native and knocked him down, but a group of other natives quickly appeared to rescue their comrade. More native reinforcements came, and the Norsemen retreated to the hamlet. While they weren't pursued, they now knew that the colony had been discovered. A visit from the natives was likely, but whether it would be a friendly one or not remained uncertain. Kjartan and his men worked tirelessly to fortify the area against potential threats. They repaired a formidable breastwork made of towering trees that encircled the hamlet, reinforcing it with all their might before the fading light gave way to nightfall. The sentries were positioned in every direction, vigilant and ready to defend against any possible attack. As the moon swung high in the sky, Bolverk arrived at the gates, somewhat late and a little weary, but his fatigue gave way to amusement and satisfaction when the familiar voices echoed out of the darkness, challenging him several times as he drew near. He grinned as he realized that his old friends were still on their toes, finely honed against danger. However, his path was soon blocked by a rough but robust barrier that prevented him from moving further, until a helpful voice from within conducted him to the proper entrance where he was welcomed warmly. The night passed on without much commotion, and eventually the longed-for dawn finally appeared, casting its vibrant rays across the land. Chapter 13. A great but comparatively bloodless fight which ends peculiarly and with singular results. As the sun peaked above the trees, Kjartan scanned the horizon and saw no trace of the natives. He was about to venture out when a man, breathless and wide-eyed, darted toward him from the ship. "Natives!" he screamed. Kjartan assumed that the man meant savages, but what he saw was unexpected. The men approaching them carried themselves with a degree of refinement, and their animal skins were well dressed in an array of bright colors. However, their intent became clear when they began to approach, shouting fiercely and brandishing their weapons in the air. The Norsemen soon realized that their attackers numbered in the hundreds and were approaching in canoes. Kjartan knew that their only hope of survival was to fight on board the ship. He barked out orders to his men. "Get on board, grab your weapons, and aim to spare life. And you, Svend, Hervar, Trikar, get the men situated as they arrive. Get the war screens up on the ship's sides. And don't forget, I'll need you, Halfgrimr, at the stern. No one should loosen the ropes or throw down the gangway until we give the order. I will see to the women." With that, each man ran off to complete their tasks with haste, while Kjartan led the women and Olaf to safety. While they were still getting situated, the canoes appeared, their bows slicing through the water. Kjartan raised his voice above the unwanted commotion. "Remember, use only small stones and aim to give them the toothache, not to kill. We need to make friendly relations if we want to live here peacefully." His men roared with agreement, mixed with unusual laughter, which caused the natives to pause momentarily. But soon they resumed their fiery approach with increased ferocity. As soon as the savages came within range, they were met with a sudden outburst from the Norsemen, who had begun to hurl stones at them. Not anticipating such an attack, they stepped back. However, they resumed their approach after a brief pause, only to be pelted with stones again 3 times. The stones injured many, but the men followed orders to avoid using heavy stones to disable but not kill their opponents. Upon getting within a few yards of the ship, the canoes surrounded the ship and remained still as the savages unleashed a flurry of arrows. The Norsemen responded with stones, and only a few of the most skilled archers used arrows when given the chance to wound their enemy without killing them. Kjartan, accompanying Hafgrimr and Hervor, stood in the open on the high stern, his iron helmet and his shield protecting him from any potential damage. Hervor saved Kjartan from any incoming projectiles by deflecting them away. The savages launched a grand charge at the Norsemen. Even though the savages found themselves facing a formidable foe, using only bludgeons, the Norsemen managed to knock them down whenever they came into striking distance. Some of the brave savages who managed to climb up the sides were caught by the legs and arms and thrown back into the lake with ease as though they were marionettes. After being thrown back, the savages resumed launching a volley of arrows, which wounded some of the Norsemen. Kjartan stood by the helm, keeping a keen eye and requesting Hafgrimr to shoot the bravest and most muscular savage's right hand. By frequently doing this, most of the savage's most skilled fighters were disabled, reeling in agony. Suddenly a colossal, nimble savage managed to climb up unnoticed by Kjartan, leaping onto the stern and standing behind Kjartan with a club raised to strike. Without fully turning, Kjartan gave the attacker a swift slap under the left ear that knocked him off his feet. In midair, he landed into a canoe, causing it to capsize. At that moment, Kjartan noticed that some of the canoes moving away from the fight towards the houses, which caused him to feel anxious. Kjartan expressed his frustration, stating that he wished he were on shore with 20 of his most capable and well-trained men to counteract the enemy's actions. Kjartan instructed Hafgrimr to shoot the leader of the attackers, fearing that they were out of range. However, Hafgrimr's arrow struck the leader's back, causing him to collapse, and his companions gathered around him. As some of the attackers made it back to land, they ran up to those surrounding their fallen leader. The fight took an unexpected turn at this moment. Olaf's enormous pet, Blackie, had been observing the fight with nonchalance from a nearby thicket where he had been cooling off. Suddenly, one of the arrows shot by the savages on the offshore side of the ship struck Blackie on the flank. Associating his pain with the group of savages before him, Blackie raised his tail, lowered his head, and let out a bellow that could rival 1,000 trumpets as he charged furiously towards his attackers. The enemy's horror was beyond description. While some may have heard of or seen the massive bison of the western prairies, none were prepared for the sight of a small black bull with flaming red nostrils, piercing eyes, enormous horns, and feline agility. One look at Blackie and the savages fled, shrieking into the woods. Startled by the commotion, their fellow troops still around the ship were alarmed and swiftly escaped by water, leaving the Norsemen victorious. "Hurrah for Blackie!" shouted Olaf, his excitement and exhilaration reaching its peak. The crowd erupted in enthusiastic cheers, and the ship was rowed back to the shore. Here they discovered a great prize 20 canoes left behind by the fleeing party. The Norsemen carefully carried these canoes up to their hamlet and secured them. On the way, they stumbled upon another find that would prove to be of immense value. It was the injured savage, abandoned by his comrades when Blackie turned upon them. Luckily, he had managed to lie motionless beside a log, and Blackie had not trampled on him. "Be careful, Krumr. Lift him gently," Bolverk instructed, as he saw Krumr carelessly handling the wounded savage. "The arrow isn't too deep. He might recover. Hafgrimr, Svend, lift his shoulders. Olaf, could you please go and tell Astrid or one of the other women to come here? Wait, Bergunnar, here you are. You're a great nurse, they say." "I try to be," responded Bergunnar. "As the proverb goes, she who tries to be is sure to be," Bolverk replied. "Nursing, like fighting, is an art that needs to be mastered. Though it seems some individuals learn faster than others, be it nursing or fighting. Bergunnar, get this gentleman inside and do what you can for him." Throughout the exchange, the native lay on his back, looking stern but pale. He likely expected to be subjected to brutal torture or burnt alive, for the natives of Vinland faced violence from their foes' treatment that they would reciprocate. However, the saga did not reveal any such details. When he was finally placed in a comfortable bed, his wound dressed, and was given a strange yet pleasing drink by Bergunnar, the expression on his face seemed to suggest that he had passed from earth and arrived at the happy hunting grounds of his ancestors. The pain from his wound, however, must have perplexed him a great deal. Nonetheless, he bore his surprises and discomforts with the resolute resignation of a stoic. Kjartan spent the remainder of the day fortifying his defences and connecting them with the area of the shore where his ship lay. He organized his men into 3 groups and assigned each to specific tasks in the makeshift fortress. Bolverk, Thorkel, and Kjartan himself led the different groups. When night descended, sentinels were posted, but no alarms sounded. The savages appeared to have had enough of fighting for the time being, and the next morning the sun rose on a peaceful scene. "Think they'll attack us again?" Gunnhildr asked over breakfast. "I think not," her husband responded. "They cannot help but know that we are troublesome fellows to deal with, even when caught unawares." "I hope they don't leave without giving us the chance to show them that we want to be friends," Thorkel offered. "No fear of that," Bolverk interrupted. "We've got one of their chiefs, or at least he looks like one, and that is as good as a string tied to their great toe." "How is the chief, Bergunnar?" Kjartan inquired. "Much better this morning. He slept well and is already sitting up on his bed. In fact, he looked so good that I took the precaution to lock the door on the outside when I left him," Bergunnar replied. Thorkel said, suddenly alarmed. "Did you lock the window, girl?" "Actually, no," Bergunnar admitted with a perplexed look. "I didn't even think about the window." Thorkel rushed out of the room, returning shortly with a peculiar smile. "He's all right," he said. "I peeped through a small shot-hole in the parchment and saw him sitting there meditating as deeply as if he hoped to meditate himself out of his prison." "Well, that shouldn't be too difficult," Kjartan said wryly. "Most prisoners manage to find their way out of their cells in that fashion quite often. But who comes in such haste? Ah, Svend, what's the hurry?" "The natives are approaching unarmed, only 10 of them," Svend reported. "Ah, good," Kjartan said, rising to his feet. "I think I see a way out of this predicament. Fetch me 9 of our most able-bodied men, Bolverk. I'll go unarmed to meet their emissaries of peace. Thorkel and you keep watch over the defences in case of an emergency, and bring the Scottish brothers with us."